I review all these uh, tapes before I post them on YouTube, and wow, it's so different. My approach to teaching is not what you're seeing because in general, when I'm teaching a class, there's people there, and I always start by asking questions, which the class responds to, and then we get a discussion going, which I try to lead to Plato's questions. But this is a little more clumsy. It's a little more clumsy to do that here, although not impossible. But anyway, I'm still feeling my way through this kind of approach, and I do appreciate your guys' indulgence in allowing this to continue the way it is, because I really don't feel like my presentation is what I'd like it to be. Another thing that's an issue is that I'm not used to talking to people, and this is not to denigrate my class in any way, but I'm not used to talking to people as well educated and clever as yourself, and have with some life experience behind you as yourselves, and so it's a little hard for me to corral the discussions and keep them on track because so many people have so many experiences and inputs and have done so much reading that, and it's not like any of it's irrelevant, but I keep trying to focus on what we're trying to accomplish. And if anybody gets kind of shunted to the side because of that, I do apologize, but I don't think that's happened so far. Anyway, that's a little bit of a
Tony, was that the disclaimers?
yeah, that was, I was just going to say that was a little bit of a disclaimer. uh, because yeah, I'm just not as practiced at doing this as I am at doing a class, which I've done for
He's
a lot.
really hinting that he's heard enough about left-handed and
No, no, no,
right-handed.
not at all. Not at all. You guys have been really interesting, and it's just that I we can spin out of control with no problem whatsoever, and I want to keep my eyes on the ball. Now, Jeff, is Meredith going to be here
No, we rearranged our schedule this week,
to avoid
and
this kind of thing?
so that the end result was that only one of us can be here at a time. She was here on Tuesday while I was babysitting, and it's vice versa today.
What do you got there? You holding up white?
New Pope, white smoke.
Oh no! Oh, there's new Pope. I
Yeah.
I saw a meme of orange smoke yesterday. Uh, anyway, Jeff, I asked because Meredith brought up a question that I was contemplating overnight, and that is what what place Plato puts Socrates in the three classes of society. And so I thought I'd just start with that real quick. And you'll just have to convey it to her because I won't remember next time, probably. Anyway, it's an interesting idea because, of course, like I said to Meredith, Plato is describing an ideal state, not the one he lives in. So he's not going to put anybody who's actually alive, a real person, in any of these classes. However, I thought about it. Socrates was a working class guy. We think he was probably a stone carver or a mason, that kind of guy. That's the best we can do. He had a wife and a couple of kids. Although I recently read something that said he had a couple of different wives. I've never heard that before, but I heard that. Anyway, a wife and a couple of kids. And for some reason, the tradition has always treated Xanthippa, that's the name of his wife. It starts with an X, Xanthippa. They've always treated her as some kind of shrew. And I don't think there's any justification for that. The only thing I can think of is they assume she's a shrew because Socrates seems to be such a layabout and not making a living. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't the case. He was a working class guy. So in Plato's ideal configuration of the three classes, he would be in the appetitive class because he's doing the business of constructing things and making civilization possible. So that's not in the ruling class or in the guard or in the soldier class, the passionate class. However, sometimes Socrates was a soldier. And in Athens, they didn't have a standing army, they had citizen soldiers. So, you know, you'd be a farmer and then you'd go pick up your arms and go to war. And so during the war, we can think of him as part of the passionate class, somebody who's acting according to honor as opposed to, you know, his duties to keep his stone cutting service happening. But I don't think, I'm not sure if Plato would ever consider him as a guardian, although why not? He seems to be a highly rational guy. So that's one thing I wanted to address. I had to think about it because it's a new question that I hadn't considered before. Another thing I wanted to address this morning is that there have been several people who have expressed frustration that is very common, and it's the very normal frustration with philosophy. That is, some people have said, well, this doesn't lead anywhere. And I think it was Neil last time who said, we were doing an investigation, and I think it was intellectual property. Was that Neil? Was that anybody here? Because I don't see Neil. And he was saying that when we looked into this, it was a process that didn't result in any definite conclusion, but the investigation itself was enlightening, and it was, in other words, he was describing aporia, where you don't know, but you know what you don't know, and that he considered that in advance, and that's what I think that was Neil that said that last time. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this is a standard thing, but Socrates always believes there is a truth to get to, and that's kind of a faith, you'd have to say. I have a quote from him, which is very unusual. I mean, it's an unusual quote. It's not unusual for me to have a quote, I don't think. But here's what he says. This is in the Meno. This is a very rare saying because Socrates is going to say he knows something, and he doesn't usually say that. This is in the Meno. He says, I too speak rather in ignorance. I only conjecture. And yet that knowledge differs from true opinion is no matter of conjecture with me. There are not many things which I profess to know, but this is most certainly one of them. So Socrates is aware of this problem too, and it comes up in a variety of places in the dialogues. Now, the problem is that you can either say you believe there is a truth, or you can say you don't believe there's a truth, and it's all relative, and that is the relativist camp. But if you say you don't think there's any universal truth, the problem is you're stating a universal truth. There's no universal truth. Well, is that true? Then what you said is false. And so you get yourself into a contradiction. Now, there's several arguments against relativism, and we didn't go into this with Protagoras, but I'm going to take just a minute to do this right now. And one of them is that argument itself, that if you're going to state there's no universal truth and it's all a matter of opinion, you've just stated something you claim to be universal truth. So that's sort of troubling. Another issue is mathematics. We've used that as a counterexample. Mathematics doesn't seem to be a matter of opinion, which is why it was fascinating to Plato. It seemed very clear that the solutions of geometry or mathematics are not debatable. They're really apodictic is the word in philosophy, if you must know some kind of fancy word for it. So that's one of the counterexamples to there being, sorry, I'm looking for a note here. That's one of the counterexamples for there being no kind of truth. Here's another one. Suppose I do something and then regret it later. Was I right the first time or the second time? You want to say, well, you were right the second time, but if you believe there's no universal truth, it seems like you would have been just as right the first time as you were the second time. But the more, and I think this is more of a Socratic point and an existentialist point. Socrates is sometimes not inconsistent with existentialism. There are points, and that is that when you make a choice in your life, you have voted with the most precious commodity you have, which is your time. And you can't do something and then go back and say, I shouldn't have done that. You can regret it. But the thing is, when you did it, you thought you were doing the right thing. As Socrates points out, when you do it, your understanding of the situation has prompted you to act in this way. And you can't undo that. So you vote every time. Every time you vote is an absolute commitment. Kierkegaard calls it an absolute. It's an infinite choice. Every time you make a choice, it's infinite in the sense that that time will never return again. And you've made that choice and it will never be undone. And so whatever you choose, we're going to have to cover this more in existentialism. I'm kind of just rambling on about it. But whatever you choose is an absolute choice. That's what they want to say. You don't, there's no, Aristotle's term is excluded middle. There's no middle. You either do it or you don't do it. You can't halfway do it. Every choice you make. And I think Kierkegaard Kierkegaard has a million parables, which are really fabulous. But they're spread throughout. I'll talk about that. But anyway, he talks about the ship's captain who's trying to decide when to turn into port, but all the time he's trying to decide the ship is moving. And so he can't stop time and determine what to do. He's always making a choice, and every choice he makes determines or is an absolute choice which can't be repeated. This is kind of an existential argument against relativism, in that you can't choose one thing and then say, well, I think the other choice was just as valid, because you didn't. By your actions, you proved which choice was valid. Also, I don't think any of you want to argue that there is no such thing as justice or truth. It's easier to see with beauty. You could say that everybody disagrees about what is beautiful. Like you could have a piece of music that you think is really wonderful, and somebody else could disagree and say it's terrible. But does that mean there isn't any such thing as beauty? I think when you think something's beautiful, it seems inarguable to you. You can't say, no, it's not beautiful. It strikes you as being beautiful, and that's all there is to it. As Tom Crow said once to me when I was having a discussion about art, he said, I like it is the ultimate aesthetic judgment. And once you make that judgment, or it's not like you even make it, the judgment occurs to you. It's almost implanted in you, or some the experience of beauty is immediate, and it's not question. You don't question it. You say, well, I don't think it really is beautiful. You can't really question whether it's beautiful or not. And I think Plato wants to say the same thing about justice, that you have an idea of justice that now you could later come back and say, I was wrong about that. I misunderstood it. But Socrates is going to say that was an intellectual error. It wasn't a moral error. You failed to understand the problem. That's the kind of thing he wants to say. Now, Plato, I was just saying this earlier, it's easier to just spin off the rails here. And because the things Plato says, or the arguments that are raised, just apply to so many things. It's easy for us to just dissipate into a lack of structure here. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to return, just having said that much, I'm going to return to a question Bill raised, and maybe some of you saw it in an email, which was about cheating in AI. And I want to relate that to Plato just really quickly because the argument's been made that education is, or a lack thereof, has what's caused the current political situation in the United States. Yeah, Peter's shaking his head. If you look at the staff that Trump has collected in his cabinet, they're all pretty well educated compared to the average American. Most of them, I think all of them probably have bachelor's degrees, and some of them have law degrees, and so they're all very well educated. So why aren't they doing the right thing? I don't think education by itself is the answer. So what is the answer? And I think you want to say, well, a sense of justice and a sense of decency. Well, if they didn't get that from education, where will they get it from? Anyway, those are the questions Plato wants to raise. I'm not saying I have an answer to them, but it doesn't seem that education, just broadly speaking, by itself is a solution to the problem. Yeah, Anne.
The fact that humanities programs are being canceled all over the place has a lot to do with it, because humanities teach values and they teach empathy and they teach imagination. If somebody's just getting a business degree or a STEM degree, it's very possible that they might turn into a person with, an active moral compass. But it's also possible that they don't have to. So just because these guys, their daddies paid for them to go to Yale, does not mean that they have developed an education in terms of moral.
Well, that means you, Anne, are defining what education is.
Yep.
Goebbels had a PhD in
I'm sorry,
romantic
Peter.
Joseph Goebbels had a PhD in romantic literature.
Right. And so I think what we mean by education is people that have been taught to think like we think. And that's kind of circular. So I don't think it's that easy to just say, okay, humanities. I never know. When I teach my class, I'm not one of those teachers that relies on my students. I don't have a fantasy that what I'm doing here is enlightening my students. And then when they leave my class, they may be better citizens. I would like to think that, but I bet half of the people that leave my class completely misunderstood what was taught, and they saw it through their own eyes, and they still are Nazis, or they're still racist, no matter what they were taught. So I don't have as much faith in education as you do. It's not what the Platonic question is. You can have all this education and still do the wrong thing, like Goebbels did. How do you explain that? And if you're a Platonist, you would say you explain it by this mysterious thing called recollection. And these are such vast topics that's why we can spin off the subject and get lost. And I don't want to do that. I want to continue, because all these things are things you know in your own life that I can't really add anything to. But my only service can be to hopefully help you understand what Plato's doing. And so we'll return to that. And what I want to do now is talk about the things we have left to do with Plato. I want to address today the symposium, and then the next thing is going to be a little bit on ethics, and then kind of a summary and a discussion of what's wrong or what could be wrong with Platonism. That's kind of the path forward here. So in terms, did anybody read the symposium at all? Okay, Bill, I see Peter. Did you
Most
read
of it?
I'm sorry?
Most of it.
Did you read the whole thing or just the thing I sent?
I reread the whole thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, you can educate us then. We'll rely on you because I haven't read it that recently. I want to call your attention, first of all, to the very beginning of the symposium. And it's because it's the craziest introduction. This is just Plato. The symposium is Plato's most lyrical and mystical piece of writing. And it's introduced by, I just want to read you the first couple of paragraphs and see what you think is going on. This is how it starts. Concerning the things about which you asked me. Well, okay, who's talking and who is he addressing? We don't know. Concerning the things about which you asked to be informed, I believe that I am not ill prepared with an answer. Typical. Anyway, for the day before yesterday, I was coming from my own home at Phalerum to the city, and one of my acquaintance who had caught a sight of me from behind, playfully in the distance said, Apollodorus. Now we know who's talking, Apollodorus. O thou Phalerian man, halt. So I did as I was bid. And then he said, I was looking for you, Apollodorus, only just now that I might ask you about the speeches in praise of love which were delivered by Socrates, Alcibiades, and others at Agathon's supper. Phoenix, the son of Philip, told another person who told me of them. His narrative was very indistinct, but he said that you knew, and I wish you would give me an account of them. Who, if not you, should be the reporter of the words of your friend? And first tell me, he said, were you present at the meeting? And then Apollodorus answers, your informant, Glaucon. I said, Glaucon is the brother of Plato, so now we know who the other guy is. Must have been very indistinct indeed if you imagine that the occasion was recent or that I could have been part of the party. Well, yeah, I thought so. And impossible, I said. Are you ignorant that for many years Agathon has not resided in Athens, and not 3 have elapsed since I became acquainted with Socrates and have made it my daily business to know all he says and does? There was a time when I was running about the world fancying myself to be well employed, but I was really a most wretched thing, no better than you are now. I thought that I ought to do anything rather than be a philosopher. Well, he said, tell me when the meeting occurred. In our boyhood, I replied, when Agathon won the prize for his first tragedy, on the day after that, on which he and his chorus offered the sacrifice of victory. Then it must have been a long time ago. Who told you? Did Socrates? No. But it's the same person who told Phoenix. Okay, who's this? He was a little fellow who never wore any shoes, Aristodemus, from the deme of Cythothedium. He had been in Agathon's feast, and I think that in those days there was no one who was more devoted admirer of Socrates. Moreover, I've asked Socrates about the truth of some parts of his narrative, and he confirmed them. Then, Glaucon, let us have a tale over again. Is not the road to Athens made just for conversation? Okay, now this is just. Do you know what's going on right now? Have you kept track of all the characters in the narrative and what's happening and who is there? Well, Plato's not a careless writer. A lot of times the dialogues just start with what is justice, that right off the bat, and you're talking and you know the characters and you just start discussing it. This is not like that at all. He's making it very convoluted to tell what's going on. Now, it is actually much worse than this because by the way, all these guys are well-known characters. Agathon was a playwright, and he had just won what is the equivalent of Academy Award at the time of the banquet, which was one of the 2 festivals of Dionysus that was held every year in Athens to celebrate drama. And Agathon was a dramatist, and he'd won an award. So he has a party. Well, this was in 416 BC. And it's not clear whether all these guys were actually in Athens at that time and were all alive at that time. But Socrates certainly was alive and Agathon was alive, but some of the rest of them, it's not clear whether they were actually in Athens. So this is kind of a recreated scene. So anyway, what happens then is Aristodemus, it turns out that the Symposium that they're talking about, Symposium in Greece was a party held by men of the upper classes, and it was a banquet basically, and drinking was required. it was not optional. It was, I mean, it wasn't quite required by law. It would just be very uncool if you didn't participate in the drinking. And there was a guy who was the official who handed out the booze or mixed it, and the Greeks would drink their wine watered down. And so it was. My understanding was a typical requirement was to drink 2 liters of wine. However, the wine was watered down, so it'd probably be an equivalent maybe of a liter of wine. But even a liter of wine is not inconsequential. And I have a description of a contemporary poet. Let's see if I can find this guy. Just bear with me a second. Maybe I can't, but anyway, I'm sorry I can't get that. I don't seem to have it right here, but I thought I did. Anyway, it was a contemporary poet who described the behavior of people at a symposium, and he says they're craters. So it's a crater, and it's kind of passed around. I think it's kind of like Fiji, where they have a bowl that's got the kava in it, and they pass it around, and everybody takes one glass or something. Anyway. The point is that there's a guy responsible, like a sommelier, who passes out the wine or passes out portions of the wine to everyone. And this guy, Eubulus, I think is his name, the poet that describes this, says, well, after one wine, one round, things get convivial. And even though it's supposed to be undignified to get out of control, Eubulus says that's not uncommon. And he says after one or two or three, yeah, fine. And then after that, it's heated arguments. And after that, it's fist fights. And after that, it's breaking the furniture and insanity. And this is how and I have every reason to believe that this is kind of how it devolves sometimes in a symposium. Also, another thing is that in a symposium, there is entertainment. Sometimes there's what they call flute girls. Whether these are prostitutes or not is not clear. It could be that they're flute girls and they come in and play the flute and leave, but it may not be. And there's certainly no indication in this symposium that anything tawdry is happening. However, the entertainment is primarily an entertainment of the participants in the symposium. This would be like if, actually 100 years ago, people would gather around a piano. There was no radio, there was no TV, maybe a little over 100 years, 150 years ago, let's say. At home, you'd sing songs. This is still done in parts of the world. Your entertainment is yourselves, and you sing or dance or do something because you're not going to watch television. You're not going to play video games. And so you're going to entertain each other. And that's what this situation is. And the assignment in this situation is each person is going to have speeches given. Encomiums is the word, encomium, and that means a speech in praise of eros or love. And so what happens is there are 3 agons. Agons are acts, as it were, that Plato has set up in the symposium, and each one is a debate between 2 participants in the symposium, and they're erudite people, and they have theories about love and how we should describe it. And one of the famous ones I've mentioned before is Aristophanes, who says love happens because at one time human beings had 4 arms and 4 legs, and they were cut in half, and now we're all after our the other part of ourselves. And as I mentioned, I think before, this is reflected in Jung's theory of the animus and anima. And so, but Aristophanes is a comedian. He's a comic poet. So we can take it with a grain of salt. Also, if my understanding, although this is lost on us because we are living 2,500 years later, my understanding is that these are kind of caricatures that Plato has written of these people, much like a skit on Saturday Night Live. They're not necessarily presented in the most brilliant light they could be, and sometimes they're saying silly things. That's the idea. Okay, so we're not going to cover any of those arguments, but then what happens is Socrates, of course, takes over, and then we have Socrates doing a little questioning of Agathon, and then what he says is, well, let me tell you about this person I met named Diotima of Mantinea, who was a sorceress who prevented the plague from happening for 10 years, or delayed it for 10 years. And as I said last time, she's the only woman to have any significant role at all in a Platonic dialogue. And here we have Plato at his most lyrical and mystical, presenting his ideas through the mouth of a sorceress who is remembered. Here's another thing about that. I forgot to mention about the symposium. This is the second day of the party. So they all got shit-faced the night before. They're all hung over. They stayed over, and now they're talking. So, and Aristodemus is one of the people, he's the one that supposedly gave the story to Apollodorus years after it happened. And Aristodemus himself passed out during the thing. So I don't think Plato could have made it any more obscure. There's so many layers of indefiniteness between the very first words of the dialogue and when we get to the speech of Diotima. In modern life, we'd call this plausible deniability. Plato says this, but hey, what can I tell you? It was a drunken party many years ago, and this is Socrates quoting the memories he has of a witch he talked to a long time before that, and this is what she told him. I don't think you could get many more layers between us and Diotima. So anyway, having said all that, that's the introduction to the central speech of the Symposium by Diotima. This pattern doesn't happen in any other Platonic dialogue, this kind of obscurity. The closest we come is this myth of Atlantis. Okay, so now we are going to speak about what Diotima says. And Diotima denies that love is either immortal or mortal. So she's going to say that there is a bridge between the world of, remember, Plato is a dualist. So there's a world of forms and a world of perception. And Diotima is going to say that love is a bridge or a messenger between those two worlds. Here she says, what is love? Is he mortal? No. What then? As in the former instance, he is neither mortal nor immortal, but a mean between the two. He's a great spirit, and like all spirits, he is intermediate between the divine and the mortal. He interprets between gods and men, conveying and taking across the gods the prayers and sacrifices of men, and to the men the commands and replies of the god. He's the mediator who spans the chasm which divides them, and therefore in him all is bound together, and through him the arts of the prophet and the priest and their sacrifices and mysteries and charms and all prophecy and incantation find their way. All other wisdom, such as he says, the arts and handicrafts, is mean and vulgar. Then she says that love is not a god, because no god is a philosopher or seeking after wisdom, for he is wise already, nor does any man who is wise seek after wisdom. He already has it. Neither do the ignorant seek after wisdom, for herein is the evil of ignorance, that he who is neither good nor wise is nevertheless satisfied with himself and has no desire for that of which he feels no want. Does that sound familiar to you? What do they call the fantasies of the current administration?
Illusion.
No, it's a dash. It's the impression of somebody who's arrived at the top and thinks they're wise because they're too stupid to realize that they're ignorant.
Dunning-Kruger.
That's it. That's it. So, like the Dunning-Kruger effect has its roots in the Symposium by Plato 2,500 years ago. It's not a new discovery. It's not a new discovery, nor is it a new type of behavior.
Too stupid to know you're stupid.
Yeah, too stupid to know you're stupid. Exactly. And that's exactly what Diotima is saying right here. So love is also a philosopher. This is Diotima again. Love is also a philosopher or a lover of wisdom. Remember, philo means love and Sophia means wisdom. So philosopher is a lover of wisdom. And being a lover of wisdom is in a mean between the wise and the ignorant. And she says that love you thought that love was all beautiful, but the love is, the beloved is the truly beautiful and delicate and perfect and blessed. But the principle of love is of another nature, such as I have described. In other words, love is not itself beautiful. It is the desire for something beautiful and the desire to possess that thing. Okay. She gives a definition. She says, then love may be described generally as the love of the everlasting possession of the good. Then what she does is something, this next passage here, and kind of the meat of the Symposium, is called the ladder of love in the literature. It's been known as that since at least the Middle Ages, or not the Middle Ages, the Renaissance. And what she does is Diotima is going to describe love with using the three different parts of the soul. And remember, that's the appetitive, the passionate, and the rational. And she's going to describe love through those three windows or structures. And so essentially what she wants, well, let me quote her again. Let's see. Actually, it kind of starts a little bit, well, all right. Anyway, she says, there's a certain age at which human nature is desirous of procreation, and procreation which must be in beauty and not in deformity. And this procreation is the union of man and a woman and is a divine thing. For conception and generation are an immortal principle in the mortal creature, an immortal principle in the mortal creature, and inharmonious they can never be. Because to the mortal creature, generation is a sort of eternity and immortality. And if, as has already been admitted, love is of the everlasting possession of the good, all men will necessarily desire immortality together with good, wherefore love is of immortality. And then shortly after that, she says, the mortal nature is seeking as far as possible to be everlasting and immortal, and this is only to be attained by generation, because generation always leaves behind a new existence in the place of the old. Now, what she's saying here is that all creatures desire the immortal, even animals desire the immortal, and this is expressed through their wishing to procreate, to continue their existence through procreation, physically creating another human being or another salamander that carries on the existence that you experience. So every individual animal is also a seeker of immortality, is what she's saying. And in this, we do not differ from the animals. In that part of our nature, we share that with the animal kingdom, the desire to become immortal through procreation. That's what she's up to. Now, that is the appetitive part of the soul. So that is the physical appetitive part of the soul that she's describing. And she says, I don't have this passage right here, but she says, you start with young bodies. This is a really interesting thing and so different from Christianity, because what she's saying is in order to succeed in these mysteries and to follow through the mysteries, you start with physical love. That's how you begin. That's what she says. And just compare that to one of the other guys in the symposium said there's a good kind and a bad kind of love. The bad kind is this kind, lust and so forth. That's not good. And Diotima specifically does not say this. She says, no, lust is part of the ladder of love. Again, if you're going to approach eventually the ultimate peak of the ladder of love, you have to start by loving in a physical way, because that's part of it, she says. Now, compare that to Christianity, which would, Augustine's going to say that all desire to procreate is disgusting and sinful, and the only reason to do it would be for procreation. And Aquinas is going to make this into a principle which now invalidates, according to Catholicism, any act of procreation that doesn't intend to include reproduction. That's where this comes from, is Aristotle, and then through Aquinas, and Aquinas is the fount of all of Catholic doctrine on this canon law, all this doctrine in this area. And so the teaching against homosexuality and contraception and abortion, all these teachings originate because they don't agree with Diotima, that there's something intrinsically valuable about the love that you have for physical bodies. She doesn't denigrate this, and neither does Plato. This is such a profound difference between the Christian view of the world and Plato's view of the world. Okay, now the second rung in the ladder of love is in the passionate, and her let's see if I can find a passage. Well, he who would proceed right in this matter should begin in youth to visit beautiful forms, and first, if he be guided by his instructor aright to love one such form only, out of that he should create fair thoughts, and soon he will of himself perceive that the beauty of one form is akin to the beauty of another. And then if the beauty of form in general is his pursuit, how foolish would he be not to recognize the beauty in every form is one and the same. There's a typo here. And when he perceives this, he shall abate his violent love of the one, which he will despise and be of a small thing, and become a lover of all beautiful forms. Now, this is him getting a bit mystical here, or her getting a bit mystical. And then the essence of beauty, in a sense, is more noble than honorable than the individual. So here you're getting to something which is not physical, that we appreciate the beauty in all things. And there's an argument against Plato, not from this particular, about this particular passage, is how could, and I think we brought this up before, how could there be a form of beauty when we know that beauty takes all kinds of different forms? So it seems contradictory to say there's one form of beauty. And I think I mentioned before that the Platonic answer to this is that you see beauty in all things because they all partake, which is the Platonic word, in some small measure. Nothing that we see with our eyes or experience on this planet is pure beauty, but all the things we find beautiful participate in the form of beauty. That's what he wants to say. And this is how he avoids, this idea that he has one, like the idea that there's only one kind of supermodel look that is constitutes beauty. I don't think that's a fair criticism of Plato. And it's a naive criticism. I think it's a criticism by somebody who has not studied Plato very much and is just presenting a caricature of him. Then, stop me at any point, by the way. Then what Diotima wants to say is that eventually the only thing that is immortal is perceived by the rational part of the soul. Because now remember that this is going back to Parmenides. What the most real thing is something that doesn't change. And so what are the real things perceived by? The real things are perceived by the mind and not by the body or the eyes. So true beauty is going to be in some kind of mystic vision that is supported by rationality. And as I've said before, this may be, it may seem strange to you, but mathematicians talk about the beauty of a solution, how satisfying aesthetically. Well, I see Laurel nodding her head. And it's so satisfying to come up with a conclusion that resolves a problem and does so in an elegant, they use these words, elegant and beautiful. Mathematicians do, we think of them as cold, hard calculating types, but no, they have am I wrong, Laurel?
No, I was actually going to say that some of you may know about the theorem that says you have to shuffle a deck of cards 7 times to get it pretty close to random. There's a mathematical proof of that. And the key lemma, the proof of it is mine. I'm actually credited in the paper, though I should.
Oh, goodness.
But the description, the description when I gave my colleague my proof, they had the proof that was pages of algebra, which I thought was just, or pages of math, which I thought was just icky, I think was my word. And I said, oh, look, here's my proof. And I think it's cute, kind of cute. And because it's one paragraph, okay? I like one paragraph proofs. And as you say, it was beautiful. So he said, no, you shouldn't say it's cute. It's a very elegant proof.
There you go.
It really was, because it was insightful, very short, and got around a lot of like icky stuff.
Icky stuff. Well, I believe this is what Plato is saying right here, that the most true things and the most perfect ideal things are experienced through the rational part of the mind. Now, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm just saying that is the Platonic idea. So the passion part of the soul, I kind of skipped over, but it's the love for the general things, and it's love for honor, and that the generalization of beauty is what she says. All right, so that's Diotima, that's the 3 parts of the soul. What happens after that in the Symposium? This is the core of the Symposium, I believe, and I don't think that's an unusual opinion. And then after that, what happens is Alcibiades comes in. Now, Alcibiades is a young, rich, very supposedly handsome, dashing general. And Alcibiades, this is not said in the Symposium, but Alcibiades got in trouble, and chronologically, this is problematic for the Symposium because he may have been in trouble at the time. Like I said, the awards were in 416, and right around that time, Alcibiades got in trouble, and they don't usually mention why he got in trouble, but it's for blasphemy or something akin to blasphemy. And what he did was in Athens, I don't know, they don't say this in a lot of, I'm going to resort to the mainstream media doesn't tell you this, but in Athens, it was common to have a statue of, I think it was Hermes with an erect penis out in front of your house. Because this would be kind of shocking to see in America today, but it was not that uncommon in Athens. And what Alcibiades and his buddies did was got drunk one night and go knock the penises off all these statues. And he got busted for it. And he was in disgrace because of this. And so that happened right around the time. Peter, you had something to say? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, Thucydides says that Alcibiades was accused of this, but he seems to suspend judgment. Maybe Alcibiades and his friends did it. Maybe his enemies did it and tried to pin it on Alcibiades, who was known to be a wild, dissolute young man who might do something like that. But I think Thucydides is pretty scrupulous about saying we don't really know who mutilated the Hermes, and we never will know.
Yes, but that I think it did wreck his reputation.
It did. Yeah, that's
so-
why he went over to Sparta.
Yeah, so people did believe it. So it wasn't a minor. He was a big guy, a famous guy, and supposedly a good general. And as a result of this, his reputation was ruined. So there were, where there's smoke, there's fire, I guess, and he may have done that. But anyway, so Alcibiades in the symposium, Alcibiades kind of crashes the party at this point. He comes in and kind of general. Yes, somebody had something.
He makes everybody drink much harder than they were drinking up
Right.
till.
And things kind of degenerate, and he eventually everybody passes out except Socrates. Socrates, everybody actually just completely passes out, and then at dawn, Socrates goes out and goes about his regular day, which Plato doesn't say, but I think we can assume from that Socrates could hold his liquor better than some people. So, okay, that's a very brief handling of the symposium. Does anybody want to add? Because you guys that read it, you probably know more than I do about it. So, anybody want to add any comments?
Yeah, part of what Alcibiades says is the story of himself and Socrates, that he's in love with Socrates. Supposedly, Socrates is in love with him. And Alcibiades offers his body to Socrates in more and more obvious ways. And finally, he manages it that they're alone. They lie down and sleep together, and he's got his arms around him all night, and nothing happens. And Alcibiades is very impressed with what he sees as Socrates' self-control.
Right. Right. So I'm not an expert on homosexuality in Greece, but even Diotima refers to it, and it's hard for me. I did actually read a book on homosexuality in Greece, and I'm not sure I'm any more clear about it than I was before I read the book.
Murky subject.
I'm sorry, what, Peter?
It's a murky subject.
Yes, it is.
Clear that it was not in itself dishonorable, but the exact attitudes toward it are not very clear sometimes.
It seems to be quite a bit more doubtful morally than it did in Sparta. In Sparta, it seemed to be more strongly part of the society and so forth, and not so much in Athens. But who can say? The Greeks are known for being gay, but of course they did reproduce, and so and Socrates had a wife and kids, so they couldn't have been that gay, but it was much more accepted than it is now. The main thing I would want to just draw from this, well, there's all kinds of things to draw from it, but clearly Plato has a mystical side. He has an analytic side that we see Socrates' display in the dialogues where he wants to pick apart piece by piece anything anybody says about anything. He wants to be very careful about what's said. But then on the other hand, there's this mystical side to Plato, and where he launches it, but he hides it behind clouds and clouds and layers of mystery before he tells you that. This really does distinguish Plato in style from all the rest of the philosophers. His mysticism and his, at the same time, his analytic talents to analyze some concept in very great detail. Any other input here?
One thing I wonder, Tony, is 85% almost of this whole thing is the long build up and everything before they really get to Socrates. Why does Plato go through all of that preamble? Is what's he up to there?
I don't know, Peter. You read it more recently than I do. I don't have an answer for that.
My guess, this isn't an answer, but my guess is that he wants to show inadequate conceptions of love.
Yeah.
So if you say love is everything that is beautiful and good, you don't explain why it's desire for something you don't have. And I think that works for every single speech except Aristophanes' speech, which I think is just a great fantasia. I doubt that Plato believed it, but I think he enjoyed it for its own sake. And it is an attempt to give a fantastic explanation for why individual lovers desire other individual lovers of whatever sex as much as they do. So I think Aristophanes' speech is one of the high points of the.
But Peter, I think you're right. That the obvious answer would be that all the rest of the discussions, although interesting, are inadequate, and will be seen to be inadequate by Diotima as we hear her speech. But then that's presented. We never get this in the other dialogues. Usually they end at aporia, and there is no Deus ex machina like Diotima coming in and saying, "Okay, well, here's the real story." That doesn't happen. And so if you stop the mute yourself, Douglas. If you stop the Symposium before Diotima, it would be a more typical kind of Platonic presentation with just a puzzle at the end, right? Something like that. Other comments?
Yeah, I was really struck by the sorceress's explanations of procreation and sexual attraction and so on. I thought, first of all, it was very sensual the way she described things, and I also thought it struck me that maybe one of the things that Plato was dealing with here was trying to sort of mitigate between the distance between the world of forms and the world of experience by using love as kind of a linking element that connects the two.
I'm sure that's the case. And it's an interesting idea that I just love the idea that all beings seek the eternal, and humans do it with a couple more levels than maybe the other just physical animals do. I really am fond of that idea, and I'm also fond of, and when I say fond, I don't mean that I have evidence that it's true. It appeals to me, and this is of a piece. If you remember the other day, we were talking about how Plato does not denigrate. Remember, Barry, you were trying to get me to state a hierarchy between the three parts of the soul. And Plato doesn't really do that. He's going to honor the physical part of the soul as being necessary and here almost fundamental, like without which Nietzsche says that and I'm gonna screw this up. It's not a direct quote, but something like Nietzsche's idea was that the intensity of a person's sexuality determines the intensity of their power or their reach for knowledge and truth. Peter, you nodded your head. Do you know the quote?
I think he does believe that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he believes it, but I don't have a quote off the top of my
No,
head.
I don't either.
But so Nietzsche picks up on, there's several characters in Plato that Nietzsche, he was a philologist. Nietzsche was a philologist and a student of the Greek language or the ancient Greek language. And so that was his area of expertise. So he wasn't unfamiliar with these guys. But just once again, how different this is from Christianity with the bifurcation of the spiritual and the carnal or the secular. Plato doesn't do this. He wants to see them joined, and he doesn't want to see the physical or the perceived world dismissed. And remember, he's kludging together Heraclitus and Parmenides. So Heraclitus sees a world of change, and what Diotima is saying is that world of change seeks the world that's changeless, seeks the eternal.
Seems to me it's much more of a pagan view of sexual attraction than a Christian view.
Well, he is a pagan.
Yeah.
So yeah. Let's see. We got I was just looking at the chat, but that's about the Pope, which I don't have any information on. So there you go. That's the symposium, and we're going to those who came in a little later. What we're going to do is next time we will sort of attempt to say something about Plato's ethics. We've already said a little bit about it. We'll say a little bit more about it, and then at a certain point, we'll be trying to summarize Plato, get all the bullet points down, and then respond with what some options could be other than the Platonic view, what problems there are with it. So that's the plan going forward. So any other questions? Comments?
Tony, I think this last explanation that you gave is surprising to me. I mean, I haven't ever really steeped myself in Plato, but I thought that one of the enduring ideas of Plato was that the reality that is to be most revered is the reality of forms that exist only in the abstract and the physical world is basically an inferior attempt to replicate the true forms but is always falls short. And the reason all oak leaves are different is because each one of them is a flawed physical approximation of the true oak leaf, which could never be seen. And so I had the idea that influenced Christians later to believe that the ultimate good and value was in the immaterial soul and an existence in heaven and sort of these things that are apart from the physical world that are higher, better, more admirable, and that things like physical sex are in part inferior to the life of the spirit and the mind, partly because they're simply physical. But you're saying that no, Plato did not make that evaluative judgment between the abstract, spiritual, logical, mathematical versus the existence of the physical body in the physical world.
Well, all those points are really excellent, and your support for your presentation would be found in the Phaedo, where Socrates definitely says that the rational part of the soul and the eternal part of the soul is something you should pay more attention to than the other. So that theme that you just expressed very well is definitely part of Plato. I think the difference is there was a school of thought, we call them the Cambridge Platonists, and they are a school of Platonic interpreters from Cambridge in England. And they liked, and this actually started in the Renaissance, where people liked to see Plato as a picture in the Renaissance was Plato was a pagan who almost got the truth, but he didn't have the revelation of Jesus. And so he was lacking the essential thing, but he kind of came to it. And this is kind of what Aquinas thinks about Aristotle. These pagans were on to something, they weren't to be dismissed. And this higher nature of human existence does seem to be honored by Plato. However, what I would want to say in response to that is that Plato's quite different in his, well, when you read Augustine and Aquinas, they are very dismissive of the physical part and the passionate part. When I say passionate, I mean not directed to God. If I'm passionate towards music, if I'm passionate about my wife, if I'm passionate towards my children, Augustine goes so far as to say that his love for his son Adimantus was Adiadatus was a sin because it was an earthly love that he had for his son. Now that is a very radical dismissal of earthly instincts and affections. And that is a theme that runs through Christianity that you definitely don't find in Plato. So I think what I'm trying to, your point is very well taken, Alan. And I think what I'm trying to do is say that Plato wasn't a moral, he was an intellectual or a metaphysical dualist, but as far as the moral dualism, he was nowhere near as radical as the Christians. And we're going to see that in next week or so, I'm going to go through the differences I see between the teachings of Plato and Aristotle on the one hand and the teachings of the Christian church on the other. I'm just going to go down through a list of them. And I find that the best way to clarify in my mind what the differences are. But this tendency to meld Plato into Christianity, I think, does a disservice to Plato. And you can understand why a Christian society would do it. Yeah, Catherine.
Well, one of the things you said when you started talking about Diotima is that love is the bridge. Love is the bridge. So from physical love to, and of course, he's covering it with mystery because it's mysterious, that however we get to that apprehension of the larger truth, form, absolute ideas, all that, love. I saw on a bathroom wall in Corvallis one time, life is the question, love is the answer. It's always stuck with me, and he said it there. I mean, he had her say it. Love is the bridge. It's the messenger.
Yeah, also, I like the idea that love is not like mathematics. In other words, love isn't a perfect, unchanging thing. It's rather it's a seeking of an unchanging thing rather than itself being an unchanging thing. That I think that's the thing he wants to say about the bridge quality that you're talking about. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I think what Alan said about the privileging of the spiritual aspect of love over the physical aspect is really a part of the Symposium, not just of the Phaedo. But I also agree with Tony and with Catherine that love is the bridge. Essentially, what is suggested by that ladder of love is that you can't begin by loving the form of absolute beauty. And the right way to begin is to love some particular beautiful person, a woman or a man for Plato, preferably a man. And then you move from there to physical beauty in general, then to the moral beauty or the beauty of the soul, then to moral beauty in general, then to the beauty of knowledge, and finally to the form. So it's as if you can't get there without going through the physical first. But at a climactic point in her speech, she says that love for the beautiful is, quote, our love for the beautiful is love for, quote, a beauty untainted by human flesh and color and a mass of perishable rubbish. So I can see how even very ascetic Christians would respond positively to that. But I think what Plato is saying is not that the body's gross or disgusting, let alone that it's evil, but that it's breakable and doesn't last. So that's why, you want to get beyond a beauty tainted by flesh, human flesh and color, and a mass of perishable rubbish. I had a philosophy professor, Rogers Albritton, who gave a lecture on the Symposium in which he explicated it in a very sympathetic way, but then went on to give a defense of human love for a beauty tainted by flesh and color and a mass of perishable rubbish. And I've never forgotten that. Because, at that point, he thought Plato was wrong. And obviously, the traditional Christianity was wrong, too.
A bunch of stuff there, Peter. That was really well done. I one time I had a humanities class from Mulhauser and Jones, and I've told this story before. And I got shit-faced before I went to class, which was very unusual. I went to the Midway, and Carl Bandelin and I used to drink at the Midway. And for some reason, we really tied one on that day. And then I went to my Mulhauser Jones class, where we were discussing Wordsworth. And I showed up with no notebook or anything. And Mulhauser says, "Mr. Johnson, I know you seem not to be prepared as usual." I mean, he called me out on it, and I launched into this rant. And the rant was about how we were kind of, let's see, what's the word? I had it a minute ago. We were with great delicacy and sterility discussing the words of Wordsworth. But the great romantic poets weren't sterile and objective. They were full of passion. And yet we were sitting here, dissecting all the, the metaphors and so forth. And I said, for all the good we've done, and I like Mulhauser and Jones, both of them. Wasn't meant to criticize them, but I was saying for all the good we see in them, aren't we missing kind of the central message? And Mulhauser listened to this and he said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Let's move on with Canto something." In other words, ooh, that was kind of icky. And I wrote to Jones, believe it or not, after he went to Caltech. I wrote to him and I recalled that situation, and I said, and I ended the letter was I right? And he didn't respond, unfortunately. I really thought he might. Anyway, the thing is, I think Diotima, the Christians have used this as the ladder of love. They use it in the same way that you're suggesting, that you kind of throw away the rungs and the ladder, and you get to this place of spiritual purity. And they've used it like that. And I think that's not what Plato was up to. And you can certainly find, it's one of those things like the Bible. You can find whatever you want in the Symposium. And so my interpretation is no better than the next guy's, although I don't like the Christian interpretation that somehow once we get to the top, we throw away the bottom. I don't think That is what Plato says here, but I could be wrong.
Honey, were you in my class?
I don't know. What, you mean the Mulhauser Jones class?
Mulhauser.
Yeah, I took that.
I don't remember who was in the class. I kind of doubt it, but we could have been in that. It was just a seminar. It was only like maybe 6 people in Jones and Mulhauser.
Oh, yeah. Mine was probably senior year.
Yeah, mine was senior year too. And the reason I felt permitted to get drunk was because I had in that class, it was a pass-fail class, and I already figured out the points so that even if I flunked the final, I would pass the class. And so nothing. I was bulletproof, right? I'm sure I passed the final anyway, but that's why I gave myself permission to be so irresponsible.
Funny.
Yeah, so I'm fond of the Symposium. It's Plato just hanging it all out there, and I believe he is trying to encompass it all, the physical life and the physical passions and the emotional passions and the intellect. He's not throwing anything out like the Christians are often accused of doing. Anybody else? All right. So next time we're on to some ethics and then some summations, and we'll just see how far we get, and eventually some criticisms. And then looking forward, we're going to do Aristotle, and we won't spend anywhere near as long as Aristotle. I just want to make a few points about him. And then we'll be briefly on the Hellenistic, the Cynics, the Epicureans, and the Stoics. I will spend almost no time on them, mainly because everything they say has already been covered by Plato, and usually critically. He already figured all this stuff out. It doesn't need to be repeated, although I'm fond of some of their stuff. And then after that, we'll be moving on to Christians, starting with Augustine. So that's the plan going forward. All right, you got. It's just a great pleasure to meet with you guys every time, and we'll see you on Tuesday.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to be here all next week. I'm heading back to Boonville, Indiana, exploring my family roots and in the middle of Trump country.
Oh my goodness.
No.
Well, you'll report back to us and hope you survive. And you'll be getting the emails on the YouTube.
Great.
Be sure to take a flak vest with you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. See you next time.
Hi, Tony.